So yeah, good morning, folks, from my side of the world. Today's topic is using the row and stack blocks. So the row and stack block are design blocks that allow us to insert multiple blocks in a horizontal row or a vertical stack. Now, on the surface, these blocks look straightforward, but the following features allow you to achieve a variety of design needs. And I'm going to ask you to keep an eye on these as we look at some examples. But the fact that you can change the space between items and also being able to change the alignment of items, and also the option to change the minimum height of the block, especially the stack block below dimensions. So yeah, keep an eye out for these as we create our examples, and yeah, know that these features really give these blocks more power. But before we go to my test website, it is important to highlight that rows and stacks are variations of the group block. So yeah, they are basically a different form of the group block. So let's see that in action. So I'm going to make my way to my first test website so that we can just get a feel for the stack block and the row block. So first, let's add or insert a group block and see what happens. So I'm going to say /group. Maybe before I do this, I know folks always ask that. So I am using a block theme. And on this test website, I have the 2022 block theme installed. But yeah, I don't think that's too relevant today. So let's make our way back to pages. Which one was that now? There we go. All right, so let's add a group block. So /group. And if you add your group block, you will notice you've got three options. So group blocks together, select a layout. So the first option is gather blocks in a container, which is your standard group block. The second option is to select a row block to arrange blocks horizontally. And then, of course, the third option is to select a stack block to arrange blocks vertically. So if we just scroll down a bit to this information here, I just wanted to show you, if you open your list view, at the moment, I've added these, it's a heading and two paragraph blocks. I've added the heading and the two paragraphs to a standard group block. But now I can quickly change things. For example, let's say I want these two blocks. You can just highlight them normally. If you add these two blocks, you'll notice in the block toolbar, you can basically decide, do I want to group them in a standard way, or do you want to change them to a row or to a stack? So let's say I want to change this to a stack. I can merely just click on that in the block toolbar, and you almost get that column effect. And that is something to also mention as we go along. There are many different ways to achieve the same thing using WordPress. And I've got a really good example that I'll show to you soon. Right, so I just decided to change this to a row block. So let's undo that for a moment. I can even select this group block. And in my sidebar settings, if you open your sidebar settings, you'll notice below group, you always have that option to change things to the stack or row block. So let's say we transform this normal group block to a stack block, and you'll see there's a slight change, because at the moment, this group block has got certain settings, and it will keep the text in those in that width and alignment. So if we select transform to stack block, you will see that it changes slightly, but also the block toolbar gives you more options. So the other thing that I want to mention is, of course, you will have all your standard settings available under styles for these blocks. But also the one that I mentioned earlier on is if you go to dimensions and you click on the 3 vertical dots, you will see below tools, there's an option called minimum height. So that is something to keep in mind as well. Okay, let's jump to my first example, because I said earlier on, sometimes you can achieve exactly the same thing, but using different blocks. So here's my example. So in my example 1, I have used columns blocks. So this, I'll open up my list view for you. Let's look at example 1. So here I've added a single column. And then below, I added a group block. And then within the group block, I added columns. And you will notice I've got 3 different columns. So that's the first example. And then I recreated exactly the same thing. But this time I used the stack block and the row block. So here you will notice I've actually added it to a stack block. And this is a row block. All right, so the one thing though that I wanted to highlight is that if you open your sidebar settings, let's just select just want to check something. Yeah, so I see the question, which one was easier? I don't know. I maybe feel that the stack block and the row block was slightly easier, but I think the main thing I wanted to highlight is that there's not always a right and a wrong here. It is what you prefer. But let's create this to show you how I use the row block and the stack block. So let's enter. So the first thing I added was a stack block. So /stack. And then I'll click on add block. And I'm first going to add a heading block. And the heading block says numbers speak for themselves. So let's say numbers speak for themselves. All right, let's press enter. And I'm going to copy and paste this text. Let's paste that there. All right, so I also wanted to make this bold. And now I'm going to select my stack block. And in my block toolbar, I'm going to say, excuse me, just undo that for a moment. Bold. So selecting my stack block. If I click on align, what does it do that? Interesting. Okay, if I click on align, we can change this to wide width. And when I change it to wide width, you will notice everything pushes to the left because it is aligned to the left. But we can change that and say we want to change to justify the items in my block toolbar to center. All right, so then I'm going to click on the 3 vertical dots and say insert after. And now I'm going to add my row block. So let's add a paragraph. So it was 170. I'm going to press enter. I'm going to copy this and press enter. So I just wanted to show you, if we look at this example, you will notice in my sidebar settings, I actually also added these items to a stack block to make sure they stack vertically. So I will highlight these two options, right? And then in my block toolbar, I will say, let's stack them. Let's also change the justification to center. And let's also make this a bit larger. You'll notice, I think it was like 70 pixels. So let's open our sidebar settings. If you go to size, I can click on set custom size. And then we can say, let's make this 70 pixels. All right, so now I've got that in place. Now I'm going to use the duplicate option. So I will select this stack block. And let's say duplicate. And then duplicate again to save time. So now you'll notice I've got that. And now I can just change. So it was 119, 290. Of course, these are just kind of examples, dummy text. So let's just copy that. The heating. All right, we're going to change our settings now. All right, so add that. And then change this text. This was happy. Let's say this was happy clients. All right, now we are going to select our row block again. And let's also change that to the alignment to full width. And also to center. And then we can change the background color of our row block. So let's go open our styles, color, background, and I'm going to select this block. And also the text, we'll say we want the text to be white. And now we are going to add some padding around, and we are going to add some block spacing between these stack blocks. So let's make sure we select our row block, open our styles. Then below dimensions, we are going to use the slider to change the padding. So let's make the padding 3. And then for block spacing, we also use the slider. And as I mentioned, these are the blocks within the row block. So we can slide that and say, let's change that to 5. There we go. You'll notice I've added some padding around the stack block here as well. So let's grab our stack block, open our styles, and we can also add some padding around there if we want to. And that's basically my first example done, all using the rows and stacks. So I'll open up my list view again so that we can see. So in our list view, we can see we've got a stack block, and within the stack block, we've got our heading and our paragraph, and then we've got our row block. And then in our row block, we've got these individual stacks. And I've added some padding. I've changed the block spacing between our blocks within the row block. And of course, I changed the background color and the text color as well. All right, now we can update. So there's just one thing I wanted to highlight before we move on. Let me just go to my first example. Oh, yes. Let me just go to group block, spacer block. I just want to double check something. Excuse me. Oh, yes. All right. I want to talk about mobile for a sec. Okay, so I'm just going to update this. And I previewed it. So let's preview this in a new tab. And I'm going to say inspect. And now we can watch it, see it on mobile. So this is the first example that we use the columns blocks. Second example where I used my rows and stacks, but I enabled one of the settings. And as you will notice here, I have not enabled that setting. And the setting I'm talking about, and I'll show you now, is allow to wrap to multiple lines. So to ensure that it displays correctly on mobile, we're going to say allow to wrap to multiple lines as well for the stack block. Okay, let's update. Let's preview. Inspect. And there we go. Now you will see it displays correctly. So just something to take note of as well. All right, great. Any questions before I move on to some other examples? All right. I showed you earlier on how quickly it is, or how quickly you can also convert something from a group block to a row block or a stack block. All right, I see there's a question. Yes, Barry, that is correct. If you select the columns block width, they are all the same. Okay, so okay, let me just go back to my example here. Okay, so just want to double check that I understand the question correctly. Yeah, so I think here I've added some more block spacing. So you will notice that they are closer together in the columns example, but we can probably remove some of this space by removing some of the block spacing. So I think that answers Barry's question as well. But yes, you are right. The columns blocks, the widths stay the same. But of course, you can change the block spacing even between columns. So you can change that using that setting for block spacing. Your question was, Suman, is the whole page moved slightly to the right on mobile? I don't think so. It doesn't look like it's... And then Holly is asking, on a blank page template, should two blocks be nested in rows? Holly, can you provide some more clarity? I'm unsure what you meant there. On a blank page template. On a blank page template. So we're not on a template though, we are just on a page. So on a blank page template, when I add blocks, some blocks are full width, others are not. Yes, so you can change the width of blocks to none, or to full width, or to wide width. All right, so Suman, yeah, he's asked me where did I change the setting. Just to show everyone again, I selected here in your sidebar settings, below settings, I selected allow to wrap to multiple lines. So there's the one you're looking at. Yeah, that's the one I changed so that it displays correctly. Okay, so if I move on, you'll notice that I've got a heading, text 1, a paragraph, a heading, and then some more content. And I wanted to show you how the columns block can actually also achieve the same thing. As I mentioned earlier on, it can achieve the same outcome as a columns block. So I'm going to select all of this, and I'm going to click on row block. Okay, that's not going to work, right? So I'm going to undo. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'll select these two. I will stack them. I will select these two. And the nice thing is that you can quickly do that with your block toolbar. I will stack them, and I'll open up my list view. I'll hold in Shift and I'll select both stack blocks. And now I will select them into a row. And of course, we spoke about wide width and full width. Now, of course, I can change the alignment and say, oh, I want it to be max 1000 pixels wide. So we can change it to wide width. And you can see you've basically done, it looks like a columns block, but it's not. All right. I want to show you how you can create this outcome where I've added a buttons block, but then I moved the buttons block to the right, and I've also ensured that a buttons block aligns at the bottom with the text on the left. Okay, so I've already created some of the design here. I am just focusing on what you see here. Okay, so let me show you how I did that. So I'll open up my list view. Let's just select the column and say insert before this time. All right, so now we are going to add a row block. And then on the side, we are going to add a heading block. And we will call that the greenhouse. I'm going to press enter. And we're going to say, make your home a sanctuary, right? And let's say we want that to be italics. Now I'm going to stack them because I want them together. So I'll hold in Shift. I'll make sure I select my heading and my paragraph. And I will stack them. Now, the one thing you'll notice is that there's quite a big gap between the heading and the text below. So to change that, we'll change the block spacing again, right? So let's open up our styles. And for block spacing, we're going to say we want 0 pixels. So we want the block spacing to be 0. And then as you saw, that moved the text up. And I like the way that is displayed. Now we select our row block again because we want to add another item, another block to the row block. So we click on the inserter. This time I'm going to add a buttons block. And let's say explore. You will notice I've actually selected the outline the outline style. So let's open up styles and select outline. And let's say we want the size of the buttons block to be small. And then, of course, you will click on link and you will add the link to where you want this buttons block or this call to action will go. I will get to the next question now. I just want to show everyone how I got this to look like this. All right. So again, let's make sure we select our row block. And this is where the settings that I mentioned earlier comes to play. So if you go to your block toolbar, you will notice there's an option that says, you can justify items to the left, center, or right, but we actually want to select the one that says space between items. So let's select space between items. And as you select space between items, you will notice all the information in your stack block will be on the left, and your buttons block will now be on the right because I've added that space between the items. Now, the other thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure that this buttons block aligns with Make Your Home a Sanctuary. I wanted to be lower. So again, we select our row block. And again, in your block toolbar, this time we will go to, let me just hover over that. It says change vertical alignment. We are going to change the vertical alignment and we're going to say we want this align to the bottom. And then when you select align to the bottom, you will now notice that they all align at these two align. There we go. All right, I see there's a question. What is the default value? Is there a standard default space between blocks? Yeah, I'm actually unsure about that. There will be a default value, but what that is, I don't know at hand at the moment. Sorry. All right, so these options in your block toolbar gives you a lot of power to change things. All right, so let's update that. And then we can move to our next example. So in the next example, you will notice that column 2 and 3 have the same amount of text. So therefore, the buttons blocks or the calls to actions also align. And what I've done here is I have made sure that all this information, even though there's less, that the block stretches and aligns, and the call to action also aligns. So this, what you see here, this does not happen automatically. And I'll show you that now. So first things first, let's open our list view. Okay, so we've got a group block. So we've got a columns block here at the top, and I've used that to add the images. So let's start with that. With the image, the left column, let's add an image. And let's select from our media library. Let's select this one. Okay, you will see that rounded effect. We can do that, or we can achieve that using the changing the radius. So let's open our styles. And we are going to click on unlink radius so that you can change the side separately. And we want top left to be 100 and top right to be 20. Okay, so we've added the image. Now let's move on to this column. So I've added columns, but I'm going to, let me just show you in this example. We're gonna stack some information together. We're gonna stack them in a column. Right, so this is my left column. I'm going to click on add block /stack. Right. And then within my stack block, we are going to add a heading block. And the heading is the Hubble telescope. Right. The Hubble telescope. I'm just going to show you this one column. And I'll show you how I got to this layout. So the Hubble telescope, let's press enter. And I'm just going to copy this text. And let's paste some content. And then press enter, /buttons. We're going to add our buttons block. Let's also say explore. And now we can change the style. Let's open styles. We want the background to be black. And the text is already white. And we want to change the radius of my buttons block to 20 pixels. And we want the buttons block to be small. So we'll select small. And then, of course, again, you add your link in your block toolbar. Okay, let's also change the size of our heading. We're going to say we want this, and I'll use the extra large option here. And then also let's select our text and say we want that to be small. All right, so now that's done. Let's select our left column. And let's change the background color of the left column to the same as the rest. All right, now we're going to select our stack block. And let's add some more padding around. So let's make the padding 5. Now we are going to group these two together in another stack because we want the heading and the text to be grouped together, and we want the buttons block to move down now. All right, so let's first select our stack block and now go to dimensions. And this is where we have to change the minimum height. We're going to say we want the minimum height to be 100%. So let's change the value to percentage. And we're going to say we want this to be 100%. Now, you would have seen, I just want to show, I'm just going to undo for a moment. Let's just select the stack block. Do you see at the moment the stack block ends there? So you've got this big section here that is just part of your columns. But we want the stack block to fill that entire column. So that's why we went to dimensions, minimum height, percentage, and we made that 100. And now you will notice if I click on the stack block, it's basically filled the entire column. Let's make sure that we send this to the bottom. All right, so we've got our column, we've got our stack block, and then within our stack block, we've got another stack block and then our buttons block. So if we select our stack block here, let's say space between items. And now when I clicked space between items, you would have noticed that the information or the buttons block pushed to the bottom. So if I select my column, I think let's just make that white again. Select my stack, change the background color of the stack. And when I do that, I can change the radius. So it was the bottom left was 20 and bottom right was 100. There we go. Okay, so the important thing to notice here is that I changed the minimum height of our stack block to 100 so that it pushes down. And then I changed the vertical alignment and I changed this to add space between items. Otherwise, this would have been up here. Okay, so let me just for clarity, I'm just going to open up my left column again. So I'm just going to, let's say, for example, we did not select space between items and we did not change the minimum height. So I'm just going to send that to 0 again. So this is what it would have looked like if we didn't change those things. So therefore, just going through it again to make sure we changed it to percentage, the minimum height, and we said, okay, we want this to go all the way down so that it aligns with the other columns. And then we selected the columns, the stack block, and we set space between items so that that pushed down. There we go. All right, so home folder is saying if the heading and the text were not grouped, would the 3 items be equally spaced using space between? Yes, so that's exactly why I grouped this. Thank you for highlighting that. So let's select this stack block. All right, so remember I grouped this. So let's say we ungroup this. Ungroup. And I think that's what you mentioned. So if I did not group these two together, everything would kind of spread out. So that's why I said I'm going to select these two and stack them together so that they go to the top and the buttons block pushes down. All right, so let's update that. I've got two more examples. And I wanted to show you how you can achieve this as well. All right, so let's say insert after. Okay. So let's say / row block. Sue, I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question. Let me see if there's a thumb. But yeah, maybe at the end, I will just I'll check in with you again to make sure I understood your question correctly. All right, so I've added my row block. I'm going to change it to wide width. Right, and then I'm going to click on the inserter and we're going to add an image. And we are after this leather bag. Okay. I don't want it to be so large, so I'm going to, in my sidebar settings, I want this to be 50%. All right. Now I'm going to click on the inserter again. And I'm going to add a stack block. And now, just to save time, I'm going to copy this text. All right, let's copy this text. Paragraph. Okay, so I've got 1-year warranty, leather bags. And now I'm going to press on enter, and we are going to add our call to action or our buttons block, which says order now. Let's make that bold and change the style to outline again. Okay. Now, how did I get from year to year? All right. First things, let's change the background color of our row block. Okay. Next, I added a bit of a border. If you go to border, I think I added a 2-pixel border. And then you'll notice I've changed the padding a bit. So I'm going to actually click on unlink padding. And the left, I am going to say, I want it to be 5. All right, so I changed the padding a bit, but I just wanted to change the left side because that looked a bit odd to me in the original example. And I also want to add some space between this block and the stack block, right? So again, we are going to go to block spacing and say we want our block spacing. We can change that as well. And let's say we want that to be 6. All right, but at the moment, you will notice this is at the top, this is at the bottom, and this is what we want to achieve. At the moment, everything is kind of grouped together in the middle. So we need to change the setting of the row block and we need to change it to say stretch to full. So we're going to say stretch to full. And when we select stretch to full, we'll see everything goes to the top. But now we need to group these 3 items together again to make sure that the paragraph, the heading, and the paragraph, we need to stack that together first. So let's stack that together. And now that that is stacked together, we can select the main stack block and we can say space between items again, and that will push the buttons block to the bottom. All right, so again, for the row block, I selected stretch to full. And once I selected stretch to full, I made sure that these items are stacked together. And then I selected the main stack block and I said space between items, and that pushed the buttons block to the bottom. Now, of course, you can even add some more padding around here if you want to. But the main thing I wanted to highlight here is the space between items and stretch to full. And as I said, it's those little things that make these blocks very powerful. Because I know on the surface, sometimes when you look at a stack block, it just looks like, oh, it's stacking things, but you can do so much more. All right, so in our last example, I wanted to talk about headers and footers, because the row block does get used a lot for headers and footers. And I'll show you how I quickly created this header using the row block. All right, so let's just go back to my test website. I went to my appearance and I went to the editor. I went to the site editor because, of course, if you're in the site editor, you are able to create header template parts and footer template parts. So I went to template parts and I clicked on the plus icon and I said I wanted to create my own header template part. And then I selected header, and it says here the header template defines a page area that typically contains a title, logo, and main navigation. And then you name it appropriately, and this in this example, I'm going to say online workshop roadblock header. Okay. And now we can create. And it takes us into template editing mode so that we can just focus on our header for now. So the first thing, of course, we're going to add is a roadblock. And on the left-hand side, we are going to add our site logo. Let's make that a bit larger. And then we are going to add our site tagline. And then, of course, I want these to be grouped together. So I'm going to add them into a stack. And I will also change the block spacing to 0. And of course, we can change this and we can say better beans, better coffee. I might say it's too close together. So we can say, let's say I want the block spacing to be 1 pixel or 2 pixels. All right, so I've added that. Select your roadblock again. And now we're going to add our navigation block. And at the moment, it's just adding a list of all the pages I have. So if I click on the 3 vertical dots, you can select all the headers you've created. And this is the one I created, a header navigation. All right, so let's select our roadblock again and change the background color of our roadblock. I'm going to use the secondary color. And now the one thing that I wanted to mention is, of course, we've stacked this together. So we know those things are grouped together, the site logo and the site tagline, but we want the navigation block to go to the right. So we are going to select the roadblock again. And you can change the justification here in your block toolbar, or you will notice in your sidebar settings, you can also below justification say, we want space between items. And if you click space between items, your navigation block will now move to the right. And there you go. I've used the roadblock, I've used stack block, and then I said I want space between items to, or space between items to make sure that this goes to the right. I'm just going to save that and even show you, because it's a responsive header. I'm just going to go to my page template. I've already added this to my page template. Oops. Better coffee. Let's save that. Let's say view on mobile. And now you can see that, of course, the navigation menu will change into a hamburger menu. And of course, when you click on that, you'll be able to see your menu. And yeah, those are all the examples I wanted to show you today. And yeah, I hope it's been helpful. And yeah, we've got 2 minutes, 1 minute for some more questions. And then I will, Sue, I will get back to that other question. Yeah, so I'm going to say goodbye for the recording. And once the recording is done, I'll get back to that question. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And we'll see each other next time.